Welcome to ATV News. I'm Adriana Doria.
And I'm Ben Mermel. Online classes have been a challenge for many students, as they don't have the same level of interpersonal interaction that in-person classes do. Alex is going to tell us more.
Good day, I'm Alexandra Gholi with ATV News. A year into the pandemic, students and professors at American University have been struggling to adjust. And with AU being an environment that demands success and full of overachievers, students are being held to high standards and expected to perform despite the negative effects that online school and the pandemic has cultivated. Jay Simon, a professor at American University, stated, quote, "I think the hardest challenge with teaching online is everyone being forced into a setting, whether they like it or not, and the normal problems that arise in a semester are magnified," end quote.
There are going to be a couple of students in any class who are dealing with some pretty significant personal challenges that are affecting their ability to keep up with a class. The number and the severity of those have gone up quite a bit since we've been online.
Deepa Talang, a junior at American University, when asked about how online school has affected her, stated, quote, "I found it very hard to focus without being in a classroom setting," end quote. Deepa Talang also has reported lower levels of motivation and also stated, quote, "I have to force myself to go outside and be around my friends socially distanced in order to combat an inevitable mental break that being isolated creates," end quote. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention found evidence of this. Out of a survey, 40% of respondents reported adverse mental and behavioral conditions, with 33.9% experiencing depressive disorder or anxiety, and 26.3% experiencing trauma or stress-related disorder related to the pandemic. Keeping up with the challenges placed on students and professors at American University during the pandemic, I'm Alexandra Gholi with ATV News.
Thank you, Alex, for that expert insight. Now we'll go back to Ben with a story about the American University Student Government Transition Plan.
The American University student government is a cornerstone of life at AU and plays a significant role in pandemic planning. With so many students moving back on campus, ATV News was curious about the student government response to this transition and what, if any, plans AUSG had to facilitate it smoothly. We spoke to a couple of candidates for political office in AUSG to get their opinions on how the school should proceed. I spoke to freshman Nico Ketty, and this is what he had to say.
The biggest focus of my campaign really is focusing on the programming and student unity aspect of the roles and responsibilities of the class of 2024 council president. It's definitely going to be difficult, because like I said, it's something that none of us have really experienced before. But what I envision student government's role, and more specifically, the role that I'm vying for, so I don't want to speak for obviously the executive or anything like that, is really, examining what the needs and wants of the student body are, doing our best to address those concerns given the circumstances that we're in now and that we're going to be in the future, and then doing our best to tailor the initiatives and the ideas and the programs that we hope to implement in a way that is satisfactory for as many people as possible.
Thank you, Nico. As we all know, AUSG is not only responsible for representing the student body, but also for so many events and so much programming, particularly Founders Ball. Next, we hear from Javon Darien, a sophomore who's running to be our next AUSG vice president.
Founders, it's such a significant event on campus. It's really sort of like that's what our student body needs. We don't know what next spring will look like. They say that we'll be back this fall, but we don't even know if that's guaranteed or not. To the ball minimum. But, all these ideas are up for consideration.
Thank you, Javon. And we hope that we will all be able to enjoy college life safely with the help of both AUSG and the university. We'll be following these campaigns as they develop, as well as the transition period and process. We're going to turn now to the field of foreign affairs, where protests have erupted outside the Russian embassy, and the focus seems to be over Russia's exercise of their veto power at the United Nations. We're going to go now to Mara, who's going to tell us a little more about that.
Thank you and good day. I am Mara Shepard with ATV News in Washington, D.C. There were protests outside the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C. and slowing traffic. On other days, groups of protesters stood across the street and on sidewalks near the embassy, chanting and using loudspeakers to demand that President Vladimir Putin and his government vote to condemn the violence happening in the region. Eritrean forces took control of a city called Axum under government orders in an offensive move after a small attack on one of their bases by a pro-Tigray People's Liberation Front group. According to the United Nations brief, over 750 people, including priests, women, and children, were massacred. After the takeover of Axum, the Ethiopian Prime Minister announced an official end to the operation. However, the violence in the region has yet to settle. American University's own chapter of Amnesty International was unavailable to comment on the situation. The United Nations held a closed discussion on Friday, March 5th, and decided to not release the statement against the violence in Tigray. India and China were both against making such a claim, and Russia decided to side with China in this decision. The situation prompted the resignation of the Deputy Chief Mission Ambassador from the Ethiopian Embassy in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, March 10th. He called the situation in Tigray, quote, the most urgent crisis in Ethiopia, and said that the government is to blame for all the deaths that have occurred. Once again, I'm Mara Shepard with ATV News. Back to you at the studio.
Thank you, Mara. Just 1 year into the pandemic, Cami Pyne will go on to discuss how the pandemic has impacted American University students 1 year later.
Students on March 10th of 2020 were told that spring break would be extended another week in order to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. 2 days later, on March 12th, the university announced that it would be going online for the rest of the semester, and that students living on campus would have to move out by March 23rd.
I didn't want it to end the way it did, so I was very sad about that.
So it was a very stressful situation to try to get all that stuff back. We got it moved out, shipped. We lost a bunch of stuff. That was really frustrating, but it was a very upsetting situation.
You had about 2 months where you were still doing school, month and a half where you're still doing school, so you're preoccupied with that. But once it got into summer, it took a real toll on my mental health, like it did for a lot of people.
Life has changed in a number of ways since the start of the coronavirus pandemic.
It changed in a lot of different ways. Like socially, in some ways, I think it was good because it allowed me to communicate more with the people who I was really close with, and less with the people who, you just see in passing, and then you end up like taking up time with them and all these other things. And like, it made me focus on relationships that were really important to me and checking in on those people. So I got closer with some people and less close with others, but I think overall it was pretty positive.
Some students and alumni are finding hope in the fact that vaccines are becoming more common.
I think the fact that I'm hearing people who are my age and my parents who are lower on the list in terms of priority, they're getting their vaccine and they're getting the opportunity to get it. I think I'm very hopeful for the future.
This has been Cami Pyne with American University TV. Thank you for watching.
Thank you, Cami. We're going to turn back to campus affairs. Dining on campus has been a point of interest for many students, particularly during this year with the pandemic and with so many students moving back on campus. Sydney is going to tell us more about that.
Good day, I'm Sydney Chesson with ATV News. After a full year of virtual learning and no in-person classes, about 600 students have been welcomed back on campus for the mid-semester residential experience, referred to by students as mini-mester. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this residential experience gives undergraduates, specifically first-year students, the opportunity to live on campus from mid-March until the end of May. During this time, students will be living in single rooms, following multiple safety precautions, and being provided a meal plan. The move-in process began on March 4th and ended on March 14th. While there have not been many issues with the living experience, students have made some complaints about the meal plan and what it provides. On the frequently asked questions page for the mid-semester experience, AU Dining stated that they will provide meals for pickup and in addition will have several food outlets open on campus. They also stated that all students attending the short residential program will be required to be on the meal plan. 2 first-year students were able to provide statements on their thoughts of the meal plan. Madeline Wagner, first-year student, expressed, quote, "This whole system seems unorganized, but the dining hall is slowly getting better." She also says that the food for the most part is basic and unflavorful, end quote. Another first-year student, Bryn Underwood, explained, quote, "I'm not someone with high expectations for on-campus dining, so it has been relatively easy with only a few mishaps. And if I don't like what's on the TDR menu, I go to Wonk Burger, Absurd Bird, or Build Pizza," end quote. As the semester proceeds, we are looking forward to getting more information on everyone's experience back on campus. ATV News will continue to report on this story as it develops. I'm Sydney Chesson with ATV News.
Thank you, Sydney. The Biden administration has been in office for 2 months now, and Ben will look into the administration's progress so far.
President Biden took office this past January with a clear goal in mind: to heal America. And in a more specific sense, defeat the COVID-19 pandemic for good. From the moment he was sworn in, he took action, signing a multitude of executive orders aimed at issues facing Americans, such as rejoining the World Health Organization, ending the Muslim ban, and reinstituting climate change environmental policies neglected by the previous administration. One of the new administration's first priorities was getting targeted, much-needed COVID relief passed through Congress. And despite the extraordinarily difficult and slim margin of failure allowed, the Biden administration seems to have pulled off its first big win, successfully drafting and passing a whopping $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, appropriately entitled the American Rescue Plan. The bill was indeed all-encompassing, and it appropriated funds for many ailing areas of American life, such as extending unemployment benefits, assistance for school reopening, and other targeted stimulus for affected industrial and economic areas. The bill passed the House of Representatives with virtually no difficulty, owing in large part to the Democratic Party's clear majority in that chamber. The real fight, however, was in the Senate, where the 50-50 deadlock had created a unique power-sharing agreement between the two parties, which resulted in individual, more moderate senators, such as Senator Joe Manchin, being given disproportionate power over bill negotiations. Senator Manchin himself dispatched single-handedly with a progressive Democratic push to include a $15 minimum wage hike in the bill. Despite this dispatching, President Biden seems to have pulled off a win in a historic 50-49 showdown that will signal to the American people that their president is serious about putting the country back on track. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was quoted as remarking during a jubilant press briefing that the bill was one of the most consequential and most progressive pieces of legislation in American history. Progressive though the White House may view the bill, some left Democrats take issue with it for not including the previously mentioned measures, such as the $15 minimum wage hike. However, many members who were in opposition, and senators as well, had an issue not with the substance of the proposals, but rather their relevance to COVID relief particularly, with Senator Lindsey Graham being quoted as saying, "This is an opportunity to spend money on things not related to COVID, because they have the power to do so." As the power-sharing agreement in the Senate can best be described as extremely delicate, many senators feel that now is not the time to flex the Democratic Party's slim majority, for fear of what the moderates, such as Joe Manchin, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins might do. Only time will tell if the unique power-sharing agreement in the Senate continues to hold, and if President Biden can successfully navigate and negotiate his way to victory. For the time being, however, both his and Vice President Harris's initiatives seem to be paying off for the benefit of the American people. Of course, for American university students, the passage of the American Rescue Plan also means that emergency funds became available for socioeconomically disadvantaged students, turning presidential ambition into actual aid for many here at AU. You've been watching our March edition of ATV News. I'm Ben Mermel.
And I'm Adriana Doria. ATV News will be following these stories as they develop further. Thank you for watching ATV News from American University in Washington, D.C.